Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be discussing Phil Johnson blaming John MacArthur for ShepCon going woke. And to some degree, this isn't entirely new. Like, ShepCon has had woke preachers in the past. But this upcoming year's lineup is entirely woke, and we're going to get into the real reason why. But Phil Johnson wants to blame John MacArthur for that being the case. And that's what we're going to call out in today's video. So the last video we did was part of what built an entire backlash against the wokeness that was, or is, ShepCon's 2026 conference. And ShepCon is the conference of MacArthur World. It is John MacArthur's, conference. It's basically the MacArthur World Conference. And Phil Johnson seems like he's now in charge of it, and now he's defending its decisions. So we're going to get into that, but first I want you to know Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support our work over a Patreon-like system, linked in the description below, but the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast, if you are new. So with that said, I'm going to show you a clip. It's almost 3 minutes. I've shortened it. I've boosted the volume. I've edited it for the presentation of this video of Phil Johnson defending the decision. He posted this audio clip on the internet.
And I got to say, I like all of those guys. Al Mohler is the most interesting conversationalist I've ever shared a meal with. And I like him. I don't agree with him on everything, obviously. And that's true of the other guys as well. Ligon Duncan.
So I just want to chime in on that. Like, Al Mohler is probably super conversational because he sticks his finger up in the air and sees which way the wind is going. So naturally that might appeal to a lot of people when they're discussing and talking with them. So that is Al Mohler's history, and that's also kind of his history on wokeness is, he went hard woke, and then sometime after 2020, he silently changed his tune without ever acknowledging his mistake. So Al Mohler is a career flip-flopper, and that is why I would consider him one of the woke preachers and speakers here.
Is the most gracious and friendly. I mean, you can't not love him if you know him. Mm-hmm. And Mark Dever has probably done more to disciple young guys than anybody else. And again, I don't agree with all of his ideas, and I'm sorry he blended wokeness into what he was training his young men. I don't think that was a huge mistake. And so I have disagreements with all those guys, but I love them. And I do. People should know that the choice of having those men come back to this year's Shepherd's Conference was actually John MacArthur's. It's not like you see in social media people saying, well, John died and now they're bringing back all these guys that didn't agree with John on things. So what are the elders thinking? It wasn't like that at all. It was John. I mean, he brought back Piper last year. And Piper gave what I thought was the best eulogy on John MacArthur at his memorial service. So these guys are capable of delivering solid biblical stuff. That's what they'll do at the Shepherd's Conference. They're not going to come in and peddle social justice or any of that. So I'm not fearful of that. I'm not opposed to having them. They're men who for years worked alongside John and agreed with him on many things. And this is their opportunity to express their agreements with John. And I think they'll do that. None of them are going to. When the suggestion was made in an elders meeting, that let's bring these guys back and let's do a panel discussion where they talk about their memories of John MacArthur. Some of them had done this. They had done this in some context with R.C. Sproul, where these men who had worked closely alongside him were giving their memories of Sproul. And it was a great hour of really edifying reminiscences about how effective Sproul was and why he was effective. And they wanted to do that for John, so let's get the guys who he labored most closely with, who were his best friends. And these are those guys. The one exception would be Sproul, and he's already dead, so he can't be part of the panel. And so they said, what if we do this? And in an elders meeting, they looked across at me and said, because I had this Q&A with these guys, they said, Phil, what do you think of this? And I said, I'm all in favor of it if you let me be the moderator of the discussion. And of course, everybody just laughed at that. That's a bad idea.
So the rest of that clip discusses John Piper, the disagreements with that, and kind of reconcludes that, yeah, this is what John MacArthur would have wanted. So Phil Johnson is trying to pass the blame onto John MacArthur, which none can criticize in MacArthur world, for ShepCon Conference being woke. So he claims that none of them will come there to discuss social justice and all that other stuff. But here's the thing. Why have there been no consequences for pastors going woke? And that is something that is very frustrating, that pastors went woke and none of them faced any real consequences for that. Lincoln Duncan should have been thrown out of Reformed Theological Seminary. Al Mohler should have been thrown out of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So with that said, there were no consequences. ShepCon was willing to cancel Alistair Begg over the gay wedding cake advice. Keep in mind that he gave, or not wedding cake, the gay, telling a grandmother to attend a gay wedding. ShepCon canceled Alistair Begg over that. So why is wokeness not cancelable for ShepCon? Because, and ultimately here's the reason, they need to put butts in seats. That's really what this is about. They're not bringing Al Mohler, they're not bringing John Piper, Mark Dever, and Ligon Duncan. Those four guys, those four headliners, they're not bringing them all the way to this conference just to sit on an hour-long panel reminiscing about their times with John MacArthur. Usually, people that are on panels at conferences are also speakers in their own sessions, especially the bigger guest. The smaller guest might only be on a panel, but the bigger guest, they're not just on a panel. So let me say this. I appreciate the difficulty of throwing a conference. I understand that it is difficult to throw a conference, and you need a speaker or multiple speakers that can attract guests that bring people and pay for the conference itself. And even sell like high roller packages just so that the conference can be affordable to even the lesser people, financially speaking. So it is difficult to throw a conference. Without John MacArthur, who's going to be the big draw for ShepCon in 2026? And that is why it is John Piper, it is Al Mohler, it is Ligon Duncan, and it is Mark Dever. They're bringing all four of these guys, combine all four of them to be a big draw in the absence of John MacArthur, because it is difficult for ShepCon to continue without big names speaking there. And the Reformed niche is oftentimes a lot smaller than we actually think it is. It is much more impactful than its size. For instance, the backlash against wokeness really started in Reformed Christian camp before it went national. It was Donald Trump who was tweeting out and retweeting Tom Askell, criticizing wokeness back in 2020. That is when, it became a polarizing issue nationally. So what we do here in Reformed world has major implications outside of it, and that's a good thing. But we should remember that in Reformed world, it's a little smaller than it actually looks, and there are not that many speakers that can draw big crowds that is kosher for MacArthur world. Vodi Bakum would have been that, but he's deceased now. But other than that, they're choosing the biggest names they can to fill in seats. And let's really get down to it. That is what this is about. Throwing a conference. Maybe John MacArthur wants the conference to continue to be successful, and he knows that John Piper, despite I don't think he's qualified to be a pastor based on his unwillingness to defend his wife with lethal force, that is disqualifying. Not permanently disqualifying, but that is disqualifying. And you can't have a pastor that's unwilling to defend his own wife because he's not willing to defend his own church. He's not willing to be a shepherd. So that, and there's a lot of other woke views that John Piper has had, and I've documented those in the last video that I did on the subject. So, but John Piper can draw a crowd. Al Mohler, I think, can draw a crowd. Ligon Duncan, I don't know how, but he can draw a crowd, and Mark Dever can definitely draw a crowd. It should not be the case, but ultimately it is, because there have been no consequences for pastors having gone woke. And now you're seeing a lot of pastors who went woke trying to rebrand themselves, and Al Mohler is definitely one of those people. So that's all I got to say about that. Phil Johnson's trying to blame John MacArthur, but let's be real. This is about putting butts in seats. Have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King. And we will catch you on the next one.